Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the NPA report. I have with me today a fellow retired cop who I really wanted you to meet because she has an incredible story and she took the time to write it all down, and she's got a terrific new book out called The Dust Never Settles, and I wanted you to meet her. Detective Goodman, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Stacey, let's talk about your career. As folks are going to tell from your accent, you're from New York. Talk a little bit about your police career.
Okay, I'm actually from one of the suburbs in New York. It's on Long Island. It's the easternmost county called Suffolk County. I was a police officer for 12 years, then was promoted to detective and retired as a detective with the Suffolk County Police Department. I spent my whole career there. I was there for about 21 years.
And so you got involved prior to 9/11/01. You got involved in a federal initiative, kind of a task force, right? To be able to deal with mass casualty incidents and terrorist incidents, if something like that would ever happen in your area, right?
Yes, actually, when you're hired as a police officer with Suffolk County, they do a really smart thing. They get information from you on what your skill set is from either past jobs or past careers, and that helps them. And in this case, we had in 1995 is when I got hired. So we had 10 weeks of field training. And in July of 1996, the TWA Flight 800 plane disaster happened. And my lieutenant was like, he knew about my past career, which was with the American Red Cross. I was a paid employee, and my title was disaster specialist. And I trained for plane disasters and man-made disasters and natural disasters. So he told me, okay, you're going to spend we're going to take you off field training and you're going to work over at the medical examiner's office where all the remains were being brought. And this was in Suffolk County. And through that, I met a bunch of medical professionals who worked for this federal agency as volunteers. They volunteered their time, their service, and their expertise to travel around the country and assist with like man-made disasters, plane disasters, or natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes that devastated communities, and they would help those communities. They did not have a police officer on their team, and once they got to know me from working over there, they asked me to join. It's called DMORT, which stands for Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team, and I joined. It's a volunteer thing. The government would train us, and we had to pay the government to get the special uniforms, and we would go for the training. And my first activation was on 9/11/01.
So Stacey, I have to ask you, what motivated you to make that switch from working for the American Red Cross to going into police work?
Well, I had always, since my late 20s, I'd wanted to be a police officer. And I discussed that in my book about how that transaction happened. And I was offered a job while I was waiting on the list to become a Suffolk County police officer. I was offered a job with the American Red Cross in Nassau County, which is where I lived at the time. And so they offered me the job, and I worked for them as a disaster specialist. And after that, I ended up getting called up to become a police officer. But before that, which got me into discussing with the medical staff, one day I was assigned to drive the medical examiner out to Mauritius, which is where the crash site, they set up the command post for the recovery effort for Flight 800. And I was talking to the medical examiner, and I was telling him how I wanted to be a medical examiner before I even wanted to be a cop, since I was in high school. But obviously my chemistry skills were not that good, so I had to find another field. And that's when he's like, oh my God, he found me charming, I guess. And he says, oh, we'll have you come work in the back. And because basically as police officers for Flight 800, we were working in the front, we were cops, but we were doing basically security work because there was a lot of people. It's small. They were overwhelmed by this tragedy. And so I ended up I was working in the front, and then they pulled me into the back, and I was assisting the medical examiner in the back, which was a good experience for me.
That's awesome. So after being involved in Flight 800, then do you go back to your regularly scheduled law enforcement career, finishing field training and all of that?
Well, no, they felt that I was finished with, I was good enough to be pulled off of field training. So I went back. Yeah, I was there for about 3 months. And then I went back to doing what they call relief driver work, which is if a guy's on vacation, you take his car until you have enough seniority where you can get your own car. That's what I did. I just bounced around the 4th precinct, which is the Smithtown area where I worked.
So talk about 9/11/01. Like all Americans, you and I both remember what we were doing that day.
Yes.
When we heard about the attack. I was a detective sergeant on a Chicago area police department. And talk about where you were when you first learned what had happened, and then how you further got involved.
It was my day off. I had just finished a set of 4 to 12s. We 5 on, 72 hours off. And when you do the nights, it seems like you have 3 days off. So it was my first day off. And what do cops do on the first day off is they run all the errands that they couldn't do while they were working. And when I, got up, took care of everything in the house, and jumped into my car, in my personal car, and I always have the radio on, listen to my favorite music, and I was just going to run to the post office, do all the boring stuff. And it was a beautiful Tuesday morning in September, unusually clear skies, which is very unusual for Long Island. We usually have cloudy skies, so surrounded by water. And I hear them talking about the World Trade Center. And for a quick instant, I thought, oh, maybe this is the anniversary of the bombing, which was in 1993. But as I'm driving to the post office, I'm like, wait a minute, the bombing was in February. This is September. So I really started listening to what was going on. And I'm like, oh, something else is going on. And so I just kind of made a U-turn and drove right to the precinct that I worked in. And I went in to see some of the plainclothes guys, and they have a little TV in there. And I walked in there, and they were all glued to the TV. And I walked in there just in time to see the second plane hit. And we knew this wasn't an accident at this point. We knew something very, very, very bad was happening. And I just told my lieutenant, I said, I'm here if you need me. And he's like, well, just go home, because nobody knows what's going on. We all just assumed that there were going to be more attacks. And when I went home, I got the call from the people at DMORT, and they were like, we're going to activate you. We need you to respond here tomorrow morning, get your bags packed. So I called the precinct. I told them I was going to be away for 2 weeks because that's the usual activation from DMORT. The precinct, I told them, I said, put me out sick, put me out on vacation, put me out, whatever you got to do, because this is where I'm going. And they were really good about it. They notified, the administration, the staff that works behind the scenes, that does all the payroll and everything. And the county executive, which is like a mayor, but he's the county executive, he runs the county. He sent out an executive order to allow me to get paid by the police department, but work in this capacity at Ground Zero. Wow. which was phenomenal. So yeah, the police department was really great about that. So I spent the next 23 days working at Ground Zero. I was sworn in as a temporary federal agent. And I was to assist, because I had no medical training. My title was logistics specialist, and I was there to assist the medical examiner or any medical staff in whatever they needed me to do. And they would attend to the medical side of things. In this case, because things were a little bit different, And we were just, there was no procedure or protocol for any of this. We were sent upstate New York to get our orders. We went down to ground zero, which at the time, ground zero basically means where the towers fell. And we set up a makeshift morgue right next to the pile. The pile also being a term used, which stood for the 1.8 million tons of debris that remained after the towers had fallen. And people would do the search and rescue. Any remains were brought into us. We had special people that set up these tents, and I was there setting everything up. And when the first victim came in, the medical examiner just looked at me and said, well, you're a police officer. This is a federal crime scene, and you were sworn in as a temporary federal agent. You have to do preliminary identifications. And that was a huge weight on my shoulders and a huge responsibility. And I did my job. I did what I was told to do. When we did preliminary identifications there, we treated all of the remains with the utmost of dignity and respect. And then we sent them off to the New York City medical examiner's office, where that's when they had all the DNA testing. And 20 years ago, as you know, DNA was not what it is now. And even to this date, they're still finding and matching DNA samples. Actually, on the 20th anniversary, they confirmed 2 new cases or 2 new victims were identified through DNA remains.
What was give me your visceral first impression when you arrived at ground zero that day?
I arrived at night, so it was even a little bit more eerie. And I'm like, you come up through Battery Tunnel, and the way it was designed is you come up and you see the towers. It was night, and all you saw is the iconic skin of one of the sides of the building that's still standing. It looked like a movie set. I'm like, this has to be a movie set. And then all you saw was dust blowing around, people working in silence, and machinery. That's it. And it looked like during the daylight, it looked like moonscape. Everything was gray, covered with this ash and dust. Like everything was pulverized. It's sort of like trying to explain to somebody what the Grand Canyon looks like without them having to ever see it. I could show you pictures of it, but between the smells and the sounds, or the lack of sound, it's very hard to explain that image. But it was just, I couldn't wrap my head around what my eyes were seeing. And as police officers, we pretty much see everything. I had 6 years on the job when 9/11 happened, so I had seen a lot. And this was just unbelievable, just unbelievable.
And you were there for 23 days, which is it's extraordinary. And, talk for just a minute on how you dealt with this. There really was no search and rescue, right? It was all search and recovery. We learned very quickly on. How did you deal with those extraordinary 23 days of doing what you were doing, which was identifying remains, and a lot of those remains, not just your fellow citizens, but fellow first responders, right?
Yeah. There was unfortunately a lot of firefighters had come through, and it was, I worked 12-hour shifts, 23 days. For the entire 23 days, I worked 12-hour shifts, and there really was no time to really sit down and think. We had debriefings after each shift, and basically it was just you got up, you got dressed, you went to your meeting, you got in the van that took us right down to the site, and you spent, I worked the night shift. I worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. You had your breakfast, and you showered and went to bed, and that was it. There was no time to really think about what was happening. You just did your job. There was no time to be tired. There was no time to be anything. You were there to help these people and just get the job done. I really didn't think too much about until later on, because I was there to do a job and I just wanted to do that job well.
And that's not untypical of first responders, right? That's what we do. We put our head down and go. We know we've got a job to do and we just go do it.
Yeah. We think
So-
about the other stuff later.
Exactly. So you come to a point where your assignment there is done. What happens next? Where do you go from there?
They send me back. I go back to the police department wanted me back. They wanted to keep me another month. And the police department's like, no, we need manpower, whatever they said. So I returned to my normal duties. And the hard thing about this is that I couldn't even talk to my fellow, police officers about this because they weren't there. They didn't know what I went through. So I kind of
Right.
just went about my day without really, discussing this with anybody at work. Very few people knew that I was actually down there. And so I really had nobody to talk to about this. This was just something I had to, when I went to the World Trade Center Health Program that was organized in early 2002 to get baselines of our health at that time, because they knew we were exposed to things. And, I met and spoke to other first responders that were there. That was the only time I really spoke to anybody about, because we were all there.
Right.
But nobody at my job that I really, could talk to about things.
So what motivated you then to write the book, The Dust Never Settles? What, all these years later?
Well, I actually wanted to have something written by the 10th anniversary, but it was kind of difficult for me. I'd start writing, and I'm old school. I literally wrote things on paper. And even so, I still had to hire somebody to help me get all those pages and organize it and do everything. And he was amazing. He put everything together, and edited and did all the graphics and the website. And it was very cathartic, though, to have this published, to have the book published. And it's also a history lesson. It's not just my story. It's a history lesson of 9/11, because they're not teaching this in schools. And I really think that children should know about this. I offer my services to volunteer and come in as like living history and answer any questions that I can. And but I like having that the book is out there, and I like having people ask, interacting with me and talking to me and really, getting the subject out there, because I think it's important that we keep talking about it, just not on the anniversaries, but this is a part of our history, an ugly part, but it's part of our history, and it needs to be remembered.
Yeah, I mean, it's been over 20 years now since 9/11/01, a day that our generation will absolutely never forget. But you're correct in that, children now in school, a lot of them, most, all of them in grade school and high school weren't born then. And we don't really do a good enough job, I think, in America of teaching what happened, not just that day, right, but the aftermath of it.
Yeah, the aftermath is pretty tragic. I mean, you have more people that have died, not just first responders, but the construction workers that were down there, utility workers that were down there. More people have died after 9/11 from 9/11 related illnesses and cancers than actually died on 9/11. You know, there are people still suffering and dying today that it's terrible. You know, I mean, that's why I'm here in Arizona, because I suffer with lung issues and sinus issues and other ailments related to 9/11 exposures.
Right, right. And that's why it's so important to continue to tell this story. Stacey, where can people find the book? Where can they find out more about you and maybe bring you in to talk about what happened?
Absolutely, yes, I do speaking engagements, and they can go right to my website and actually book an appointment with me. They can also get the book from my website, and the website is Stacey, Stacey, Goodman, book.com, all lowercase, all together. And once you get there, you can learn about me. There's a place to purchase the book. If you purchase it directly through me, it is on Amazon. So you always have that option. But if you purchase the book through my website, through PayPal, secure site, I will sign the book, personalize the book and sign it for you.
Awesome. Stacey Goodman, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.